you've dealt with mind control in some ways, in some fashions, and you know something about the mind, clearly, and about this information field, and I'm wondering if there's something within the information field and or the mind-body interaction that can be set up to protect oneself against, let's say, mind control devices such as the digital television that is now projecting, you know, able to communicate with people in their houses and so on and so forth.
Well, that's an assumption. They're designed specifically. As an example, in the probably 80s, the Russians had a thing that was, because it sounded like a woodpecker on a shortwave radio, it was called the woodpecker. And they had 3 large locations that were transmitting probably several million watts per location, and they were phased in a particular area so they could move where the peak of that electromagnetic wave would fall. And it turns out that one of the places here they had it fall was in a town called Eugene, Oregon. And people there were getting sunburns while they slept at night. And they were getting headaches, and they were having birth defects and so forth. And the woodpecker had a very strong signal there, and a highly interfering signal. And it was at a psychoactive frequency, so that it would disrupt the appropriate thinking capabilities of the brain.
This is all documented, by the way, on the net.
Oh yeah, it's all documented on the net. And there were also, a good friend of mine was a man who discovered that they were bombarding the Moscow embassy with microwaves that had much the same frequency content. So there was a fellow that designed a little device that you could wear under the collar, which was provided to all of our personnel that we needed to make sure had clear thinking, that they could carry with them, and it would send a signal, a close-by signal, remembering that electromagnetic waves decrease with the cube of the distance. After a very short distance, the signal is very, very weak. So you put a weak signal near the person and drive their mind into a range of brainwaves that would be benign or even hopefully beneficial. And they found a very simple way to find out what was beneficial, and then a very simple way to tune the device so that it would put those waves out. And they were carried by all types of diplomats and military personnel for
so we
years.
can
and
assume
years
that
and
the
years.
president and various people are using these devices to this day.
I would certainly think they would be. I know it would. I know that I carry one around.
Okay, and you're saying this person who invented it, you're saying you're not the person who
I didn't
invented
say
it.
anything about it.
Okay. But there's also a technique involved such that one can do it without the device if one learns?
Yeah, you can learn to hold your mind pretty much in whatever mode you want.
But it has to do with the informational field, is that right?
No, it doesn't. It has to do with the electromagnetic field.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So your mind, you use your mind to affect the electromagnetic field?
No, you just use your mind to generate its own electromagnetic field at a benign frequency, or even a helpful frequency.
To counter it is what you're saying.
To counteract it.
Well, you know,
I'll give you an example. You get 3 or 4 people that are very close, or 2 people that are even closer, and what you'll get is you'll get heartbeat synchronization, which just occurs, and then you'll get brainwave synchronization, and then unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the situation, you get hormone production. And hormones are very, very powerful messengers, and then you get into trouble, but or not. But
it's a form of entrainment, right?
It's a form of entrainment, and you get an entrainment. So a very weak signal can give you great entrainment. Nikola Tesla made a device that used compressed air, and it was a little weight, and he could stick that on the ground outside of a skyscraper in New York, and this thing would sense ground wave oscillations and tune itself to them. So it would start out very rapidly and slow down, and then it would find where it was affecting the environment. It would resonate with it. It's like if you have a wine glass here and you play your violin upscale, eventually you'll find where, if you stop real quick, you'll hear the wine glass vibrating. Then if you play that note exactly, pretty soon the wine glass will break, because just a little bit, it's like pushing a swing. If you push a swing in phase, the swing will go way high. If you push it out of phase, it'll stop, it won't go very high, it'll go high and then low, number of things. You want to get it resonant or in phase.
So what about the idea that you were telling us about the piece of the heart? You could cut off a piece of the heart and it would actually give it to somebody who would recognize, a doctor, who would recognize it as a part of the brain or have resonance.
It would appear to be brain tissue.
And this is like a medical fact, right?
It's a medical fact. And there's a very good book that anyone who has a child that doesn't read this book should be jailed. I'm serious. It's called The Magical Child by Joseph Chilton Pearce, P-E-A-R-C-E. And he has follow-up books on it. For example, The Magical Child Matures tells you why that no center city fatherless child is ever going to amount to anything, ever. They can't, because their brain doesn't form properly.
Really?
Yep.
A fatherless child.
Well, or motherless.
An orphan.
A child that's raised outside of a normal family environment, let's put it that way. That's much more accurate. And it'll tell you why that can't happen, why they can't really become useful to society.
Well, is this the thing you were telling us about the heart, being close to the heart?
Part of it, that's part of it. That's just part of it. There are a number of different factors. But one of the things that Pearce writes about in The Magical Child is, for example, that during the first 16 days or so after the amniotic fluid breaks, the child is exposed to electromagnetic field from the mother's heart beating, and that field is modulated by what's in the brain cells in the heart, which are the emotions, and those emotions are transferred to the child. So they thought, well, that may be true, so they went to Europe, where a lot of women have their children raised by wet nurses who nurse them on their breast, and they find out that the child takes on the emotional content of the wet nurse. Or children who are raised without a father never get the male emotions from the father, as compared to the female emotions.
It happens in the first 16 days. After that, it's not
the greater part of it happens within the first 16 to 18 days.
Incredible.
And it turns out, for example, the Russians did brilliant and massive research on this, found out that if the child is born underwater in a fluid, remember the child's already in a fluid, it isn't going to hurt him to be underwater for a while. The child's born underwater in a fluid about body temperature and moved up with contact with the mother to the breast, where if you look at how you would naturally hold your arms and nurture a child, the heart of the mother and the heart of the child are going to be right next to each other. The child starts picking things up. If the child is kept in that position for the first 12 to 14 hours, the child usually develops speech by 6 months of age, and is able to stand on their own at 6 months of age.
Can you talk about that Russian doctor?
I unfortunately, I could if I remember his name. I can't remember his name.
Okay.
He was brought to the United States, and I can tell you that his techniques were used by Madonna in having her children. I can tell you that her children are some of the most brilliant children on the face of the earth because of that. I know that she worked for using those techniques for a year to a year and a half before they were conceived, just to become ready. And could well be privileged information, but it leaked out to me.
So you're saying
to be true.
That the heart has an information field component which somehow entrains the formation of
No,
the
I'm
nervous
not
system?
saying anything about information field. I'm saying the
Okay.
heart has an electromagnetic component that is there because the heart beats, and it takes a large electrical current to beat the heart.
Okay.
Anything the body is bioelectric. Anything near a magnetic field or an electric field that's conductive then has components that come from the things around it that are electric or magnetic or conductive.
The digital television that is now projecting, you know, able to communicate with people in their houses and so on and so forth.
Well, that's an assumption. They're designed specifically. As an example, in the probably 80s, the Russians had a thing that was, because it sounded like a woodpecker on a shortwave radio, and people there were getting sunburns while they slept at night, and they were getting headaches, and they were having birth defects and so forth. And the woodpecker had a very strong signal there, and a highly interfering signal. And it was at a psychoactive frequency called the woodpecker. And they had 3 large locations that were transmitting probably several million watts per location. And they were phased in a particular area so they could move where the peak of that electromagnetic wave would fall. And it turns out that one of the places here they had it fall was in a town called Eugene, Oregon, frequency, so that it would disrupt the appropriate thinking capabilities of the brain.
This is all documented, by the way, on the net.
Oh yeah, it's all documented on the net. And there were also, a good friend of mine was a man who discovered that they were bombarding the Moscow embassy with microwaves.
You've dealt with mind control in some ways, in some fashions, and you know something about the mind, clearly, and about this information field, and I'm wondering if there's something within the information field and or the mind-body interaction that can be set up to protect oneself against, let's say, mind control devices such